GT the Vibe Podcast. Welcome to another episode of Cult Church Cult Wednesdays is what I'm calling it. It's going to be it's every Wednesday based on I've done some research on some church cults, and I'm going to be talking about it essentially, bringing some things to your attention, bringing some things to light, and kind of talking about what causes people to end up in these situations. This one is Word of Life Church Cult, and this is going to be in New York. Um, Word of Life Church, I think Chadwicks, New York is I believe where it's at. Um, and it's founded by the church leaders Jerry Irwin. Um, so let me give you a little bit of the history of Jerry Irwin, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a understanding of how he came to power. Uh, well, let me see. I had it pulled up here. I like to keep my notes all handy. Like I said in prior podcasts, I'm always going to be hashing out the fact that you need um, to have a personal relationship. If you're a Christian or a believer, you need to have a personal relationship with the Lord Himself. Um, it's crazy that people get up in these situations, man. But yeah, but this church essentially had Jerry Irwin was the leader, and they all lived in this building. I always call them compounds. I don't know why. It makes it sound like uh, it makes it just sound crazy when you say compound. But I know Jerry Irwin's daughter ended up taking over the lead at this church. And there was a teenage boy that went there that ended up being beaten to death. His name was Lucas Leonard. And so basically, this church cult. This is back in 2015 when this individual had a beating. So essentially, what happened with him was he was going to this church. He wanted to leave, so he went to a different church with his sister. And his sister's like, "Hey, come check this church out. You might like it," because he's looking for a way out essentially. Um, and the thing about these cults, man, is that sometimes there is no way out. Like unless you can escape quietly through the night, there's typically not always a way out, a way for you to get um, out of these places. And then you got leaders like Jerry Irwin who says that he is the direct line of God. So he believed himself that he was Jesus because in the Bible it says Jesus said this: the only way to get to my Father is through me. So you have to get to his Father, you got to go through Jesus. So if you're replacing Jesus with flesh and blood, Jerry Irwin thinks that he's the Messiah, so he's the way to get to God. People believe him. People literally believe him because people lined up to go to church. And so what happened was this Lucas, and he had a brother too that was also beaten. They ended up trying out a new church, man. He's a teenage boy, he want to try out a new church. Um, gets back to Tiffany Irwin, who's the daughter of Jerry, because Jerry ended up passing away. And she's not happy about it. So it gets back to her, and they call it an intervention. So they go into this room to sanctuary inside the building, and they're basically asking him like, why did you do that? Why'd you go to another church? We don't want you to go to another church. Um, he expressed that he wanted to leave. He wanted to leave. He wanted to go somewhere else. He didn't feel safe there, which now we find out why he didn't feel safe there because now he is dead. And what happens next is just absolutely ludicrous. His parents, um, and it's crazy because he had claimed to his sister that there's mental abuse going on inside the church. That he was being mentally abused. They were scolded if they went against whatever the leaders wanted in the church. And his parents were 100% bought into this. It's because to me at some point you got to protect the kids, right? You got to be able to protect the kids and keep them safe. But when you're brainwashed like this and you believe that this guy is Jesus, whatever he says is going to go. And so he passed that down to his daughter, and his daughter ran this church even more harshly than he did. She got a little bit of power, and it went straight through her head. So there's claims of mental abuse. So essentially, on that day, when his mom and his dad were part of this, there was a extension cord, plug extension cord that was out, and she started beating him with it, just beating him, hit him in his groin. They're punching him, they're kicking him, they're stomping him, beating him up while he's down. And so they beat the heck out of him, Lucas, and they beat his brother up too, Christopher Leonard. So you got two brothers here, and I don't, and I've done a lot of research. I don't know what Christopher had to do, why he was involved in the beating, or maybe he knew, and they wanted to kind of teach him a lesson essentially. But they beat him to a pulp. Like they beat him up, they beat him pretty bad, and the beating went on for hours. They proclaim hours. It went on for hours and hours and hours. And then essentially what happened is, um, Lucas is still in the sanctuary. He's laying on the floor. Um, Chris ends up in a room in another part of the building, and he's still bleeding out his own point. So they left these kids bleeding out for 12 hours, right? This is supposed to be Jesus people, people of the word, people that believe in the word. This is what they're doing to one another. Um, but yeah, and then the next morning, Lucas is unconscious. His parents flip out. They throw him in a white van. They speed off to the hospital. They get to the hospital. They pull him out of the van. They're acting like they're doing CPR to this kid. Literally, they're faking CPR. Like, you didn't do CPR when you put him in the van. Before you put him in the van, you didn't do CPR. But now that you're in front of cameras and people can see you, now you want to do CPR. So that's essentially what they did. They get out here and then they want to do CPR and all that jazz. So you know it's crazy to me, right? I mean, he's clearly, this kid's passed away. And so what happens is in these instances, and I can speak from my law enforcement background, is that if a case like this shows up to the hospital is calling the police department. Like, the police department gonna get involved. They're gonna have some questions, like, because his injuries, look, he looked like he was beaten. And so they call police department. Police department shows up there. They get mom and dad in custody, and they take him back for questioning. Debbie is the mom, and Bruce. And so they asked the parents, they're like, man, what happened? Like, what happened? Their original claim was that there was some touching of younger girls in the church by these two, and so they felt like they needed to do an intervention. And so law enforcement was like, okay, makes sense to what we see. His injuries are pretty bad. I can see how you would be angry enough to feel like that's warranted in a situation. But Christopher is still alive. And so they end up getting a warrant. They don't know he's still alive. So they end up getting a warrant on the building. They go kick the door in, blood everywhere. There's a chair with blood all on it. And there's one extension cord that's put back in the room that had blood on the tip of it too. So they knew that that was used, obviously, in the crime. And blood everywhere. And then so they're searching some more. They're searching some more. They go into a room upstairs, and they find Christopher laying here. He's on the end of his rope too, because he's been bleeding out for a while. They get him out of there, get him to the hospital, because he's going to be the key to finding out what really happened. They contact the parents again, ask them some more questions, and they stick to their story of the molestation is what pissed them off, and they went overboard. A couple of days go by. Christopher starts getting better, and then he gets up. He tells the story. He tells them. He says it's because my brother went to another church, and so they beat us. They beat us, and they left us. And he said that Tiffany, who was the leader of the church, called for a counseling session, and that's because Lucas wanted to go to a different church. She called for this counseling session, and she said blows that hurt drive off evil. And so they believed that the blows that they were giving to this kid was driving off the evil. The evil was not evil doing. It wasn't that he did something evil. The evil was the fact that he wanted to go to a different church. And so they didn't want him to go to a different church because that'll screw up their way of life, essentially. So they didn't want him to go to a different church. So it was like we got to beat him to death. Essentially, is what happened. So they beat him to death. Tiffany ended up fleeing, but they ended up catching her. And the parents got some time. Dad made a deal when he testified against other church people involved, so he can get a little bit of a plea deal. But that means that's another horrific incidence of neglect from parents and being brainwashed. So just being brainwashed, like allowing people to tell you, right, your beliefs and how you need to believe. It's a dangerous game that people play, right? Very, very dangerous game that people play. But they get involved. And the problem with them getting involved is that sometimes this is the outcome of when you get involved with this type of stuff. Sometimes this is going to be the outcome. Sometimes this is what you're going to have to deal with on the other side of it when you get out and hey, man, it's time to flow. You end up like this. Terrible, terrible tragedy. Um, I feel bad for the loss. I feel bad for the parents, man, for them putting themselves in a position to lose a son. Um, it's crazy, absolutely ludicrous that this would even happen. Again, I go back to the premise: you need strong masculine men in a church because they will stop this type of stuff from happening. This type of stuff don't happen around masculine dudes. Dudes just taking care because masculine men are going to live by a set of rules, and if you're not abiding by a set of rules, even if you're a cult leader, you can be a narcissistic cult leader. Um, and most of these people are narcissistic. They're so. much emboldened in themselves. They believe in themselves. They put themselves on this pedestal that they get idolized. They literally bask in the glory of being idolized, right? And then that's what leads them to power. That's what leads them to power. This is GT5 podcast. So please like, subscribe, and share. Comment on the bottom if you have any questions or you want to have anything to say. If you've dealt with being inside of a church cult, there's lower levels of this. These are the extremes of church cults. There are lower levels of church cults that we deal with in society today. Lower levels. There are some extremists out here in the church community that do things that are not societal norms. We'll just say that. And so yeah, it's good to talk about it. But it's GT Vibe with the Vibe podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you on the next one.